Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Maurice Brown Comedy Hour, our final comic of the day, all the way from San Diego, California, on our show this evening. I'm so glad you guys were able to take time out of your COVID-19 day to be on our show. And so this comic here, I met in San Diego at a clean comedy conference in 2016, and he just recently filmed a dry bar comedy special, so that should be released at some point this year. I think it was going to be this summer. It may be pushed back a little bit, but look out for that. He can also be heard on Pandora Radio and Spotify, and be seen on Comedy Time TV. And in 2009, he founded the Rock Comedy Ministry, arguably the first comedy ministry of its kind in any church at the Rock Church in San Diego, California, with the very popular and effective pastor Miles McPherson, whom I'm a big fan of. You can purchase this comic's comedy album for $6.99 online, and we'll give you some more information about that a little bit later. And you got to check that out. Regarding the comedy ministry at Rock Church, it's all about helping the homeless, the elderly in convalescent homes, and cancer patients. And he specifically has performed, get this, what a list of accolades for churches and other organizations. And also, he's been a part of fundraisers that have raised thousands of dollars for the Alzheimer's Association, Global Missionaries, Victims of Domestic Violence, and Victims of Human Trafficking, among others. And again, as I said before, we met each other in 2016 in San Diego at the Clean Comedy Conference. Ladies and gentlemen, with no further ado, please welcome to the show the very funny and the very talented Brandon Young. What's up, Brandon?
Hi, Maurice. How are you, sir?
Man, I'm doing great. It's good to see you, man. I haven't seen you since 2016
Yeah,
at the Cutting. Man, by the way, we had a great time in San Diego at the comedy conference, man. The only caveat you had to remember when leaving the hotel was don't go that way, unless you want to go to Tijuana. But any other man, other than that, dude, that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun, Brandon.
Yeah, Maurice, you did your research. You got everything on my website down. That's great. Good to see that.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, it was that, and you hosted actually that weekend along. Was it you and I think it was you and Maria Herman?
Yeah, Maria Herman and I put that conference together. We did it for I think 2016 and 2017. And in 2017, I had actually moved back to Michigan. I'm originally from Michigan, moved back to Michigan for my day job. And it just got to be a little too much trying to organize such a huge event, being away from San Diego.
Right.
I was putting a lot on Maria, which, I mean, she obviously could handle on her own, but it got to be a little much. So I stepped aside from that. And so we only did it the first 2 years. And then I focused on the Paul Bunyan Comedy Festival, which was in my hometown of Oscoda, Michigan, which is where we were able to raise a few $1,000s for the Alzheimer's Association, which is a really nice thing to do. And then I moved back to San Diego July 2019. So I'm back in San Diego, and here I am. And I'm not organizing anything. I'm just trying to focus on comedy right now.
Well, speaking of comedy, which is why we're here, how are you dealing with that right now? As far as we got this COVID-19 thing, and everybody's entertainment lives, particularly comics, has been disrupted. How are you dealing with that entertainment wise?
It's been tough. So right before COVID, I had a show at the end of February. I think it's the 26th of February, somewhere around there. And then I took as much possible time as I could, I guess. A lot of shows weren't opening back up in San Diego, California in general. And then it wasn't until about 2 weeks ago when I was able to get back up on stage. There are a lot of opportunities where I could have done virtual shows. I'm not a huge fan of them myself. I don't know. It just seems odd to me. I mean, it's hard enough doing stand-up in front of an actual audience of people standing in front of you. But when people are behind a TV or a computer screen, to me, it just seems even more difficult.
Well, it is, dude. It's something. It's kind of an acquired taste, because I did as soon as it shut down. I did a pre-recorded show that I submitted, and they ran all of the routines on a designated night. I'll never do that again
Yeah.
because I can do that in the mirror. So I'm done with that. And then I started doing the virtual shows with faces on the screen. And of course, that's a little bit better, but the laughs are kind of delayed 2 to 3 seconds. Wait for
Yeah.
it, wait for it, wait for it. And so, you kind of have to get used to that part of it. But yeah, I mean, right now, I mean, that's the best I can do. I mean, but people are doing shows outside.
Yeah.
I'm starting to notice that people are kind of coming back a little bit.
Hmm. Well, I mean, in San Diego, there are a couple shows that are running outside right now. Not in San Diego City, but outside in San Diego County in different cities. Now, I don't know the legalities of that, so I'm not going to tell you where that's all happening, but it is happening. So hopefully, you guys can go out to those shows if you're out in the San Diego area. Now, I don't know. I don't know if it's just citywide, if it's countywide, if it's statewide, but I mean, the shows that I've been on, the two shows that I were on, they practice social distancing. Comedians were a good 10 feet away from the stage. The audience members were sitting a good 6 to 8 feet away from each other, unless they're at the same table. All the comics didn't have all the comics when they were sitting down, all had their masks on. Took them off during the show, and then we had two microphones on one of the shows, so the host would take out the old mic that the last comic had used, clean it off, and then another comic would walk up on stage with a fresh mic. So, in my mind, I don't see what the problem is. There's no difference between an outside show versus an outside dining experience, other than maybe people laughing. But I don't. It's not that much different. People laughing versus people talking. You know what I mean?
Well, I would agree with you. I think this whole thing has really caused us to look at things in a different manner. Like we have a whole lot more time at home, and I'm home with the wife, the kids, and I learned something. I learned, Brandon, that I don't know how to cut my TV on.
Yeah.
The kids have totally taken over the technology in the house, and you got the PlayStations, you got the gaming, you got the TV, you got this, yeah, the Apple, the Hulu. I don't know anything about that stuff, so I finally realized I don't know how to cut the TV on. So the kids, they have to help me out. My son ordered some equipment the other day, and he and his buddies were putting it together. Me, the computer dummy dad. I'm like, whoa, man, what are you guys doing? This is awesome. And my son, he looks at me with no comment, Brandon. He just looks at me. The translation is, don't you see grown people talking?
Yeah.
I'll be upstairs if you need me, son. He's not going to need me, Brandon. But anyway, no,
Probably not.
getting, the the thing about the social distance shows is that we love for people to be packed in.
Yeah.
And we would like our ceilings kind of low, to maximize the laughs. And so having people spread out, I would imagine, brings about somewhat of a different challenge. But
Yeah.
I have
Really
not tried an outdoor show yet, but I'm thinking that I may have to do it pretty soon.
Yeah, it wasn't that bad. I mean, trust me, I've done a lot of outdoor shows before all this was going on, and
Yeah,
I'm not a big fan of outdoor shows because that's that whole reasoning of the laughter just traveling up and just going out of nowhere, and it's just a lot more difficult to get people's attention when they're outside for whatever reason. But these shows, the people were there for the comedy, which that's also a lot of the outside shows. That's people aren't really there for the comedy; they're more there for social interaction or whatever reason they're there for. But these two shows that I were part of were two of the best outdoor shows I've ever seen. So that's a good thing.
Brandon, I got to tell you, I'm really fascinated by your ministry there at Rock Church. I follow Miles McPherson a lot online. Me being on the East Coast, no way I can go to the Rock Church, but he's really a great pastor. And tell us a little bit about how you were. First of all, I think Miles McPherson would be open. I mean, he's just got such a great personality. How did the whole thing come about? You starting the comedy ministry?
Well, the Rock Church at the time, they focused a lot on a lot of ministries. So people were just starting ministries, not just to have ministries, but because there was a heart behind it. So there's like a
Right.
quilting ministry where they quilt things and give them out to homeless people or whatever else organizations. There's also ministry for former prostitutes, that type of thing. So my ministry is a little different. I actually, let it be known, I stepped down from the ministry about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe, as
Oh,
leader.
okay.
So I still fill in if they need stand-up comedian for any events. Then I'll step in and do that. But they're focusing more on improv now than they were, because back then when ministry originally started, it was stand-up comedy, which I had only done maybe a handful of shows at that time myself. I had no right of starting this comedy ministry. Like I wasn't even known in the San Diego comedy scene. I'm still not known now, 10 years later or whatever it is. But it was just a calling, and I had been passionate about comedy. And at that time, I was doing a little bit of open mics here and there. And I said, hey, you know what? Why not bring comedy to homeless people? Why not bring comedy to cancer patients, children, people that wouldn't otherwise get comedy? So I started the comedy ministry. So I was doing stand up. We had some sketch comedy as well. So we had a few skits that we had written. And then improv kind of fell in a couple of years after it had started. When we first started, I think the most members we had at one point was about 20 people in the comedy ministry, and now there's maybe 6 or 7. But they're focusing more on the improv aspect of it, which there are Christian improv troops out there, and I'm not sure if they're like church specific. If there are any church specific ministries, I know there's one up actually in at Rick Warren's church. Can't remember what the name of the church is, but I know there is a
Saddleback Church.
Yeah. There is an improv ministry at a Saddleback as well. So I'm not sure when they started or not, but I do know that they are involved. They do improv and things like that at that church also.
Well, the thing about it is, comedy is not having a comedy ministry in a church is really not something that you see very often at all. And I think that comedy is being accepted more in churches than it ever has been. But it's still, Brandon, a slow introduction. A lot of churches are just simply not ready to fully embrace comedy, in my estimation. And why do you think that it's kind of a difficult thing for churches to fully embrace it?
It may be that comedy is looked at as funny, and a lot of churches want to be more serious about Christ. But
yeah,
I can't imagine Jesus was sitting around with 12 other dudes and not joking around. It's just hard for me to fathom that. So I mean, there are a lot of mega churches will have like the huge names, like the Michael Juniors, Tim Hawkins, the Shonda Pierces. So those big, huge names will come to those churches, and then there's some smaller churches that will do some outreach events to try to get people to come to church, or they'll do fundraisers for missionaries and things like that. So there are a lot that are going out there. But I'll tell you, about 4 summers ago, I tried to reach out. I reached out to about 250 churches, just trying to get booked. I just emailed 250 churches, and nobody knows who Brandon Young is. And I got this many bookings. So 0 bookings out of 250. I had a couple of emails back saying, "Oh yeah, what's your rate?" Blah blah blah. And I messaged them. I thought it was very low. I even lowballed just to try to get the booking, and nothing ever happened. But that was definitely a learning experience for me, and it kind of disheartened me a little bit. Like, can I do this? I was doing clubs and other venues also at that time too, but I really would love to do church comedy, church shows full time. That would be my ultimate dream, to do that.
Right.
But for whatever reason, I wasn't very good at marketing. Obviously, emails at that time didn't work. I don't think emails work now. I think it's more calling and having a reason for them to book you, not just to have comedy for the sake of comedy. I think there has to be something behind it. Whether or not you're trying to raise funds for missionaries, or you're trying to outreach to bring people in the community to go to that church that might not otherwise go to the church. If a friend will ask, "Hey, come see this clean comic. Come see this comic at the church." So, but there's got to be something behind it. And I think at that time, I was more of a me just wanting to do comedy for the sake of me wanting to do comedy and not something behind it.
Well, you look at Michael Jr.,
Yeah.
John Christ, who's coming
Yeah.
back into the scene now. And there's some other Jeff Allen. He's going to be on the show tomorrow.
Yeah.
Jeff Allen's a
Okay.
well-known Christian comedian who gets a lot of work in places like Saddleback and
Yeah. I think
so forth. And so it's a marketing strategy that has to be well thought out, and you have to. It's just something where it's because I was in the same boat, last year, try to, kind of do the same thing. And it's all about the marketing strategy. You got to have people that know what they're doing, that can go in there and get. But if you look at Jeff Allen or Michael Jr. or John Christ, those guys, they have a company that goes in and gets them booked.
Yeah. Yeah. They have age
And
sure. But
so
Jeff Allen already has like 43 dry bar specials. So he's got hours. No, he doesn't have that many. He has like 2, I think.
yeah,
But he has hours and hours of material. I mean, this guy's been doing comedy for 30 years or whatever. So
yeah.
he's a known commodity, whereas Brandon Young's not a known commodity yet.
Well, and here's the thing, Brandon. You would think that most churches would just be open to hiring a comic. If you tell me you're a comedian, that in and of itself might, you would think, would develop some interest. But
Yeah.
it's no different from any other, expertise in the entertainment business. You got to have an agent. You've got to have a representing company that goes in there and blows you up, and then you have to have somewhat of a name.
You don't have to have that, but it definitely helps. Because I know quite a few.
It helps.
Yeah.
But I also think, Brandon,
they get out there and they get it done.
What's that?
I know quite a few, even Christian comics that don't have agents or managers, but they make their living doing comedy full time, and they do a pretty good job of it. But they know how to do it, I guess.
Well, it comes to knowing how to do it, but at the same time, I still don't think comedy is that visible. I'll say this: it seems like there's still some pushback in the church towards comedy.
Yeah.
But I just found your association with Rock Church, because that's a big church.
Yeah.
Rock Church is a mega church with a tremendous pastor. And the fact that they established it there, and I'm not surprised that Miles would do that, because he's just got that kind of personality. But it's just a big church, and comedy ministry is just not something you hear about every day. You might see Michael Jr. or any other Tim Hawkins or whatever show up with a big show, but having a ministry like that dedicated to comedy, you don't hear about that every day.
Yeah, Michael Jr. has gone into I think he has a special where he went into a prison, and he does ministry at the prison, which I've been able to do that. Lisa Gilbert and I went to a prison out here in San Diego area, and that was a great event. That was an outdoor show, but it was a phenomenal event, and it's one of the things I'll never forget that show, because they were there. They're not going anywhere, and a lot of them aren't going anywhere anytime soon. So we definitely had a captive audience, to say the least, pun completely intended. But it was a good show, and it's something I'll never forget. It was a blessing more to me than I think it was to them.
Brendan, how does your faith influence you as a performer?
Christian comes first, comedian comes second for me. I think for a majority of Christian comedians, or comedians who are Christians, the Christian part does come first. So for me, I try to be clean, not for the sake of being clean, but I try to work clean because that's who I am as a person. And I make mistakes just like everybody else, but I try not to do it on stage. I have my act pretty well tuned with what I do on stage, and I don't need to swear. That's just not who I am anymore. I haven't said any of the major swear words in over 10 years since I rededicated my life to Christ. And I'm not saying that other people don't have to swear to make a living in comedy, because that's ignorant to even think that. But
right.
I think the people who are themselves most on stage are the ones that are extremely successful.
Now, as a Christian comic, and you've already kind of touched on it already, but I'll ask you anyway. So do you ever perform in open mics, secular open mics to work on your material?
I haven't done a lot of open mics probably in the past 5 or so years, but that's just because I don't like open mics. I was getting booked on enough shows where I could work out newer material at those
Yeah,
shows, as opposed to the open mic. I've got nothing against open mics. I'm just not a huge fan. There are a lot.
right.
I did a few when I was in Michigan. I take that back. When I was starting out and coming, when I moved back to Michigan in 2017, I was doing a few of those open mics. But those open mics really surprised me because there was a lot of audience members at those open mics. There was like 40, 50 people at an open mic. But a
Where's this?
majority, this is in Michigan.
Wow.
Yeah. So it kind
Wow.
of threw me off a little bit. I was like, oh, this is an open mic. But most of those open mics are booked open mics. So you have to get booked in advance. Whereas it's not like a true show up, go up open mic. There are a few
Okay.
of them that are like that, but majority is where there's actual audience members. It's at a lot of them are at a comedy club, but a few are at bars or wherever. But people were there just to have a good experience, enjoy
What
themselves.
what part of Michigan is this, Brandon?
This is near the Detroit area. As I was out of Ann Arbor, so Ann Arbor Comedy Showcase had a pretty good open mic, and then the Comedy Castle, Mark Ridley's Comedy Castle in Royal Oak, which is near Detroit. They have a really good open mic, and then there are a few other shows like in Flint, Saginaw that were kind of booked shows, but a lot of them had open mics also there.
When I think of Michigan, I think okay, Detroit, and you really don't. I've never really heard that much about comedy in Detroit, but that would be my first thought. Comedy in Michigan, but Saginaw and Ann Arbor. I'm surprised. Wow.
No, the Michigan comedy scene really surprised me coming from Southern California back to Michigan because I started comedy in Southern California. And then going to Michigan, I was like, oh, there's only going to be like 10 people, 10 comics in this whole scene. And oh, no, there are literally, I'd probably say a good 1,000 or so comics. And that see, Michigan comedy scene's kind of spaced out a little bit. So there's the Detroit scene, Southeast Michigan, which is like Detroit, Ann Arbor-ish. And then
Yeah.
you have Flint, Saginaw, and then you have the west side of the state, which is Grand Rapids, which has their own scene. Kalamazoo kind of has its own little scene. Lansing, Central, in the center of Michigan has its own scene. So it's like, and all these comics are traveling around within about a 2-hour radius, hitting up all these shows. So there are a ton of comics and a lot of really good comedians out there as well.
Yeah, I'm in the DC area, and you were saying like 40. I don't. Every now and then you might see a mic where they have like 30 to 40 people. Usually it's just the room full of comics.
Yeah,
So,
which is what you would assume most open mics would be. But
yeah,
I still remember my first open mic I ever did was June 6, 2006. I was in Oklahoma City visiting my brother. My brother was in the Air Force at the time, and he was
yeah,
doing stand-up comedy. I have an older brother. He and I, whenever I have a joke, he's the first person I'll text with the joke
yeah,
usually.
yeah.
And if I don't get a response, I know it's not a good joke. And he hasn't responded to any of my texts in 3 years, so it must not be that good. But he and I have very similar mindset as far as comedy goes. So I'll hit him up with ideas, and he'll send ideas my way and things like that. So I trust him. But he was doing stand up in Oklahoma City, and I was out visiting him, and I was like, you know what? I've been writing jokes since I was in college. So around 2000, 2001 is when I started kind of writing jokes. And then I just never had the, I guess, courage to get up on stage. And then I was in Oklahoma City visiting my brother, and he was like, "Why don't you just get up on stage?" I'm like, "Okay." So I signed up for the open mic, and I did, I think, 4 minutes, and I got one laugh in 4 minutes, and and it was a joke. It was on a joke I don't even tell anymore. So I was like, "Wow, this is not a good experience," but but I stuck with it. Came back to San Diego. I was working nights. So the first few years when I was trying to do comedy, I could probably only get up 3 or 4 times a year. So I wasn't getting up a ton. And it wasn't until about 2010, 2011 when I was starting to get up a little bit more and get a little bit more involved in the scene. And like I said, I was doing the comedy ministry in 2009. So I was doing that a few times a year also. So, but I still remember that first open mic where it was just, I was like, how come nobody's laughing at this? And I didn't understand that there were no real audience members there. I was at the Looney Bin in Oklahoma City, which is still one of my goals to get booked at. I still need to reach out to them because I'd really like to come back and do a show there, at least feature at that club where I did my first open mic. But I didn't know that it was going to be bad. You go in, you have these high hopes of like, oh, I'm going to be hilarious. They're going to laugh at these jokes. No, not even close.
Yeah, well, a lot of times it really never turns out that way. Every set I write, I think, is the greatest set I've ever written, and then you find out, no, it wasn't. But it's part of the learning process.
Here I am, 14 years later, still not as famous as I thought I'd be, but here I am at the Maurice Brown Comedy Hour or whatever.
Well, that means you're going places now, Brandon. I'll tell you that, dude. So, and Brandon, how do you deal with? You've been doing comedy approximately 10 years, I think. So, how do you deal with hecklers on stage?
Surprisingly, I haven't been heckled a ton.
Okay.
I think the worst heckle I've ever had was it wasn't even the worst heckle I've ever had. It was the worst, I think, response to a heckler I've ever had. I was running a show in 2013 with Dustin Nickerson, if you know who Dustin Nickerson is.
Yes.
Yeah, he and I were running a show in La Mesa, Space Bar, which is still around. So they'll hopefully have shows back once all this is over with. But I was being heckled by an elderly lady, and I just I couldn't take. I don't even remember what she was saying. I just couldn't take it, and I go. She was there with about two of her friends, I think, two or three. And I was like, "Where's your husband? Where's your husband, ma'am?" I'm like, "Are you married?" She goes, "No, my husband's deceased." And I said, "I can understand why." That was my response. It was definitely a very Christian response, and I apologize profusely right there. But I was like, "Wow, did that just come out of my mouth?" I can understand why your husband is deceased. Not a good thing to say.
But, well, that was an instinctual response because when you're in that you're in that zone when it's like, okay, wait a minute, your anger it all depends on how you deal with the heckler, man. A lot of times I try to just kind of stave them off and you're right, but no, hold on, wait a second, but you got to listen to the rest of this or I will appease them. Usually 85% of the time they're just excited and they think they're helping, or they've been drinking too much and they think they're helping. But then you get it sounded like the person you were dealing with was a dedicated heckler.
I mean, I wish I could remember what she was even saying. I remember being so upset at the time, and she probably wasn't even. I think she was just talking during my set. I don't think she was like being rude or anything intentionally.
Okay.
And I just kind of just snapped and became this totally different person. It was just like, look, lady, will you just shut up for 5 minutes? That's all I have. I'm just hosting the show. Will you shut up? Something. So it was just like,
well, you get to a point, Brandon, where it's like you start. I know for me after so many performances, I just kind of slip into my own world, and even if you're trying to say something, it's like you're not going to keep me from my punchline, and if you keep talking, you're going to go with me to my punchline. Just kind of how I just keep going, and invariably they'll kind of go away. What is your worst bombing experience, Brandon?
Which one? Now, I have a couple of good stories that I tell. Actually, a friend of mine does a podcast called The Art of Bombing. So if you want to hear some really good
my gosh. Oh, man. Yeah.
artofbombing.com. Anyway, so my stories that I usually tell, and one I don't think I bombed. It was just a show that probably shouldn't have happened. I did a fundraiser show with another friend of mine. We flew out to Michigan. We were doing a little tour out there, and we did a show for a woman I went to like middle school with, and it was a fundraiser show at a high school, at a local high school, and it was an auditorium, seats about 600 people, and there were about 20 people there. So about 20 people, and 10 of which were little kids that were just running around. And the best is, it was a fundraiser show. It was me and another heavyset comic. Fundraiser show was to raise money to provide healthy snacks to kids.
Okay.
So you have two fat comics trying to raise money for healthy snacks. That wasn't going to work out. Uh, but so all these kids are running around. So that was one experience. It was the buddy that I was with. He says that was the worst show he's ever been a part of. So I've got to mention that one.
How old were they, Brandon?
The kids were probably
Yeah.
like 5, 6, 7 years old.
Oh
They were
man,
just
wow.
here, and their parents were paying attention. I didn't think I had a bad set. I thought I had a good set, and we each did about 20, 25 minutes. So it was just if it wasn't in the auditorium, it probably would have gone a little better. But it was in the auditorium at 600. But it was fine. Still raised a little bit of money for kids for healthy snacks who wouldn't otherwise have it. So that's the positive of it. But the worst bomb I think I had, I would say it was about 3 years ago. It happened in Michigan. It was at a town called West Branch, Michigan. It was a
Okay.
fundraiser show. And for whatever reason, I had to do 20 minutes. And I, for whatever reason, I think I did 20 or 25 minutes. I couldn't get anything going. They were eating food. So it was like right when they just got done or it's just started eating. So I
Yeah.
get that, but it was just like, it was my demographic of the people that I would normally do, because it seemed like more conservative type people. So I looked at it as more of a church show. It wasn't a church show, but it was more that demographic of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was supposed to be church clean, like squeaky clean. I did some squeaky clean. Then the headliner went up and he started working bluer. He's like, "Is it okay if I start swearing?" They're like, "Yeah, go for it." They're all into him, and they didn't want anything to do with me. I was like, "Man, what the heck?" But the cool thing about it is the headliner ended up booking me to have me feature for him on another fundraiser show in Ann Arbor, so it worked out. But I was just like, I don't know. I've been doing comedy for almost 10 years. I don't know what's going wrong here. There wasn't. It was the sound system was fine. It's just they were eating is the only thing I could think of. They just didn't want anything to do with me. But
Well, that's a cardinal rule that definitely want to adhere to. Never
yeah,
perform when people are eating or
yeah.
in
But I
the
mean,
buffet
I've
line.
done dozens of shows where people are eating in clubs and whatnot. So it's like it's not anything unusual. It was just for whatever reason they didn't want anything to do with me for a good 20, 25 minutes. So
Oh my gosh, dude,
yeah,
that's tough, and that's a long time
yeah, oh
to
yeah,
not really get anything.
anything, yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, I'm going to start using my closer now. Like my closing 5 minutes is a pretty decent closing 5 minutes, and
And
they just
Brandon,
didn't want
and
nothing.
so and there's nothing about that set that you can take away and go, I should have done that or nothing.
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I can't think of anything of what I could have done differently
Yeah.
that would have gotten their attention more. Um, I mean, I don't know. It was a weird thing. At least I got paid to go there. That was
There,
a
well, that's
positive.
a good thing.
But it was, I mean, and then the headliner, like I said, the headliner ended up booking me to have me feature for him, which that show went a lot better that time around.
Well, obviously, you've been doing this for a good while. And
Mhm.
so I want to ask you how long it took you to realize, okay, I think I can do this. Like how many years in before you realize, you know what, I think I can be a pretty decent comic.
It's weird. I think it changes. I think there's some shows that I have where it just clicks, or I'm like, I need to be doing this full time. And there's
Yeah.
other shows that happen where I go, I need to stop doing comedy completely. Uh, like I said, it was about 4 years ago where I reached out to those 250 churches. At that point, I said to myself, you know what? I think I can make this happen. If I can just get a couple of these churches to sign up and book me, and off to the races I'll be. But that never came to fruition, and here I am 4 years later, even after that, where I second guessed. With this whole COVID thing, it made me question: should I stop doing comedy? I've
Right,
got
right.
a dry bar special coming out. It's supposed to come out this fall. I think November-ish is when it's probably going to come out.
Yeah,
I'm like, well, I
yeah.
got this special coming out. Should I quit or should I wait until the special comes out? Should I keep going? And then I did those shows, those outdoor shows, a couple weeks ago, and those went over really well. I'm like, man, I need to get back to doing comedy more often.
Well, it's all about getting the reps, and
Yeah,
being out there as much as you possibly can, just to keep the rhythm and the creative juices going. Is this time period that we're dealing with right now? It's not really good for comics, but you've been around a lot of comedians that are really good. You did
Mhm.
the conference in 2016, and
Things that have happened in my life. Like I used to have a really bad gambling problem. That I don't talk about that on stage, but I haven't found the humor in it yet. Like at one
okay,
point, I owed two different bookies over $20,000. Yeah,
whoa,
uh, that was in the mid to late 2000s where I had that issue. Luckily, the woman I'm married to right now, my wife, who I plan on being married to the rest of my life, she was able to help me out with a couple of those problems. We
okay,
took out some loans and paid off the bookies, and I don't have that problem right now. So that's a good thing. So those are things like where I'm like, how do I incorporate me losing nearly $20,000 into my act? Because that's who I am. That's who I was at that time.
yeah,
But I haven't been able to find what's funny on it. Another thing, like I was when I left school at Central Michigan University, I was one class shy of graduating,
okay,
which I didn't know about. I thought I had all my required classes, but apparently I was missing one class, which no one had ever told me about it. So then I promised somebody some graduation tickets because I was only going to have my mom show up. And then about a week before graduation, I hadn't received my tickets yet. So I asked the counselor, I was like, hey, where's my graduation tickets? She's like, you're not graduating. I'm like, what do you mean? You still have one class you have to take. I'm like, why didn't somebody tell me about this? So
yeah,
I
yeah,
was extremely stubborn. I still am extremely stubborn. Now I need to take like 4 or 5 different classes because my program has changed. I'm like, it's just a piece of paper. Um, my job isn't related to anything I went to school for at all. And I want to be a professional comedian when all said and
yeah,
done. You don't need a degree for that. So there's like things like failures in my life that I'm like, how do I incorporate this into comedy? I think a lot of it just hits too close to home. So it's difficult for me to talk about those things. Whereas the really, really great comics are able to talk about those things and shed light on them and make them humorous in a way. So I think that's what's holding me back.
yeah.
But once I figure it out, I think it'll move me up the ladder a little bit.
Well, a lot of great comics attack their worst
Yeah,
experiences,
yeah,
and it's I mean they just go all they go
oh, yeah.
all the way in. But what is the biggest thing after 10 years of doing comedy, Brandon, that you have learned about it that's made you better at comedy?
Um, man, I think I've learned from other comics more than things I've learned personally doing myself. I've learned from like comedy legends, like the comics that I've really liked working with, like the Jimmy Brogans, Eddie Brills, Kathy Ladmans, Jan
Yeah, yeah,
Karen. They were all super nice, like super friendly. And I'm like, I want to be that person to a different generation. Like when I book these comics, um, like the Jan Karams, the Kathy Ladmans, Jimmy Brogan, I booked
yeah,
these comics, Eddie Brills, and I got to talk to them and just actually like learn about who they were. And they didn't have to be nice to me. They're like, I was just a guy who paid the money to come do shows. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I was their best friend or anything like that. But I look up to them because they treated me with such respect that I'm like, oh, that's how I should start treating everybody else. And they looked at me as a peer, I think, more than just a booker. Oh, this guy's an actual comic too. So that's one thing I learned. And another thing I've learned from other comics is it doesn't matter what level you're on. You're a comedian. You're all on the same level. You all have the same goal as
yeah.
far as bringing the greatest experience to an audience that you possibly can bring.
Right,
It doesn't
right.
matter if you're doing open mics, if you're headlining theaters, whatever it is, you still have that same goal of allowing people to laugh. So I think it's comedy can be very selfish, but I think if you don't make it selfish, they can be even better. Like you'll when you give back to others, you obviously get back more in return. As cliche as that may sound.
Well, that's of God. This is the
Yeah.
way the Lord operates. You have to have a giving heart in order to receive anything. That's part of our mission as followers of Christ is to be willing to help. And the list of accolades you have on your resume, and helping the elderly in convalescent homes, helping the homeless, and the disenfranchised. I mean, that's a heart of Christ, and God rewards us for giving, and that not that that's what you're looking for, the reward, but that's what God does. When you give, He gives back, and He doubles and triples and quadruples,
Yeah.
what He gives back on top of what it was that you gave. So that's just a Christ-like heart, and God bless you for what you're doing in the San Diego community, Brandon, because I'm hugely impressed with that. When I was there in San Diego in 2016, I had no idea that you were doing those types of things. Although you were doing a good job on stage, and I remember Jimmy Brogan, dude. Jimmy Brogan, I've never seen I've never seen anyone like that as a performer in the art of comedy. I mean, the guy, he will go up there with no set.
Mm-hmm.
He has no prepared set. He's an older guy, and he just looks like this nice older gentleman.
Yeah.
And he just has these little conversations with the audience, and he's actually baiting you into a huge punchline. But it's not that Jimmy's not a bad guy. People are kind of rude in general,
Mm-hmm.
and they're impatient, and they throw little barbs and things like that, and that's all Jimmy needs, dude. Jimmy just needs just a bit of salt,
Yeah, his
and he
crowd
will
work is incredible.
destroy you. He can do
Yeah.
it for an hour.
Yeah, well, the thing about Jimmy, what cracks me up is he was one of the head writers on the Tonight Show. So
Yes.
it's like, but all he does is crowd work. I mean, for the most part. So how do you become a head writer or a writer on a major late night show like Tonight Show with Jay Leno, only doing crowd work? So he can write. He's an incredible writer, I'm sure.
Well, he's just brilliant. I mean, and he will tell you when he gets on stage, "Hey, look, I'm not a comedian.
Yeah.
I don't do comedy." But I don't like comics generally that do crowd work. I mean, a little bit of crowd work is fine, but if you just live on that, I don't like it. But Jimmy made me a fan.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this guy was so prolific at crowd work. He made you feel like he wasn't doing crowd work. He was just this nice old guy that was having a conversation, and the man killed for like at least an hour. And like I said, he used to do it on the Tonight Show, and so forth. And speaking of Jimmy and the Tonight Show, did you have any comedy heroes as you were coming along growing up?
Oh yeah, my favorite comic of all time is Brian Regan. So I love Brian Regan.
Great
love
comic.
Jim Gaffigan. With Jim Gaffigan, obviously he had that the Twitter thing this weekend. We're not familiar with it, which is insane to me because I was reading some of those tweets. I'm like, this is who Jim Gaffigan is. Like the guy you see on stage, like, oh wait, why is he not being himself on stage? Because clearly this is him in real life. Where we got fed up with the president of the United States so much that he felt the need to post it on Twitter and had a huge long Twitter feed going on this weekend. But I was looking, which is funny. I'm not a big political guy or anything like that. One person in office isn't going to change my life one way or another. I'm going to live my life how I live my life, whether it's Trump or Biden or whoever is in office. Like, I'm still going to live my life the way that I'm going to choose to live my life.
Absolutely.
There are checks and balances, and some people may say, "Oh, there's no checks and balances with Trump." There are, because there's just like there were with Obama, there are checks and balances. So it's like, whatever. Anyway, but I saw Jim Gaffigan's number of followers he had actually went up quite a bit. I mean, I think he was already at 3 million or something like that, but he's at over 3.2 million now. Maybe even 3.3 million. So
wow.
So through that meltdown, people are like, "Oh, you're going to lose fans. You're going to lose fans." He gained over 200,000 followers at least on Twitter because of it. So he's gained new fans from this. And I mean, I don't know if he's going to change his act at all. That's for him to debate. But I mean, he's already one of the biggest comedians on the planet. I can't imagine him being even bigger, but it could quite possibly happen where he gets even bigger because of all this. If he starts talking more, but he doesn't really talk political in his act. But if that's who he is in person, then I could see him writing jokes based around that.
Oh, but, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But going back with Brian Regan, Brian Regan's my biggest comedic influence. I'd love to open up for Brian Regan sometime. I'm jealous. I have a friend. She got to open for Brian Regan a few shows. And I'm like,
Oh,
man,
wow.
so jealous of you. But so happy for her also.
That's huge. That's
So,
huge.
yeah.
Well, listen, Brandon, you've already done a dry bar special, man. I mean, that is pretty huge in and of itself, dude. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
And when is that coming out, by the way?
Like I said, it's supposed to probably come out in November. I think it's supposed to come out.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not sure with all the stuff that's going on, but I'm expecting to come out in November, December.
So how did you like it? How did you like the the crowd out there in Provo, Utah? How was it?
That was phenomenal. So I'll backtrack a little bit. So when I got booked for it, I had emailed the booker, I think 12 weeks in a row. We got 12 weeks in a row where I'd email and not get a response.
Wow.
Until that last week. So I was just like super persistent. I got to the point where I was just like, hey, happy Halloween. Like just sending an email, just letting you know I still exist. Because it got to the point where I'm like, you know what? If this guy's not going to book me, he's not going to book me, but I'm still going to have fun with it. They ended up booking me, which is great, obviously. So I went out there. I filmed it back in January. I think it was mid-January. And they were so professional. The staff there was just, I felt like, wow, I'm here. I'm being filmed on a special, and they're treating me like I'm being filmed on a special. Like This is my special. There were a couple other comics on the show as well, but it was just a tremendous experience. Sold out crowd for the first show. The second show was for the most part sold out. The first show I think was my better set of the two. It was earlier, I think, a 7:00 show, and I think they did a 9:00 or 9:30. I'm trying to remember. Anyway, that first show was just I barely remember it because it was one of those things where it's like an out of body experience where they're laughing and laughing and laughing. I'm like, this is the best that I've ever had. If I'm going to peak, this is the time to peak.
Yeah.
So it was just one of those where I'm excited about it. They sent me a rough draft, rough cut of the video. And I thought it came out pretty good. There was a couple things where I wanted changed, but other than that, it should come out to be a pretty good special.
So how long did it go, Brandon? Were you on stage?
I was on stage. You do 2 25-minute sets.
Okay.
So I did both my 25-minute sets. I did the same, for the most part, the same jokes. Like I said, the first set, they were laughing so long that I didn't get all my jokes in that I had practiced for.
Awesome, man. Wow.
The second set, I was able to get a couple other jokes in. So it was, they may tighten it up a little bit. So it'll probably be about between 20 and 25 minutes, somewhere in there.
Oh, wow. That is really terrific stuff. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have Brandon Young coming out with it. What's the title of the special, Brandon?
It is Chicken Gone. Is the title of the special. I have a joke. It's a true story that happened. It's called Chicken Gone. So that's what the special is called. It's a catchy title. It stands out a little bit. Like, what's Chicken Gone? What does that mean? So it's based off a true story that happened. You guys can go to my website and check out the one of the videos of the joke. Have it on there.
So, Brandon, that was a big opportunity for you. Obviously, flying out to Provo, Utah, and getting the special. They're treating you like royalty, comedy. The whole 9 yards. I've talked to a bunch of other comics that have done dry bar. They pretty much have said the same thing that you did. Not just in this case, but in general, how do you deal with the butterflies and the nerves, before you go on stage?
Man, I tell you what, my throat was super dry. At first taping, I had cotton mouth like you wouldn't believe. It didn't matter how much water I was drinking, and I forgot that I had water on stage during my set, so I never reached over to get water. So I think I can tell, my wife could tell, but I don't think anybody else could really tell that my mouth was dry. Like my wife after the show was like, "How dry was your mouth?" I was like, "Ooh, it was pretty dry." But hopefully it's not that noticeable. But now once people hear me say it, they're like, "Yeah, his mouth really was dry, wasn't it?" But it was fine. The second set was a lot, because I'd already done the first set, so the second set was much more relaxed.
Yeah,
but it was just different. I think I had the butterflies really helped me out. I think that first show, I had really bad butterflies. I think when I took the 6 months off during this COVID, when I came back into the show, a few weeks ago, I was super nervous. I was trying to find excuses to get out of it. I was like, "You sure the cops are the cops going to come and break it up?" Or like trying to think of anything I could think of to get out of it without actually doing it. But once I was up on stage, it all came back to me. The
Yeah.
funny thing is, I had only planned for 12 minutes. I was only supposed to do 12 minutes. So I did my 12 minutes. The headliner never showed up. And
Oh man.
so the booker was like, "Hey, can you do some more time?" And I was like, "I haven't done comedy in 6 months." So I was like, "Yeah, fine." So I had a couple newer bits that I was like, "Yeah, I might as well just treat it kind of as an open mic."
Yeah.
Went
Yeah.
up and did those newer bits. One of them went over really well. Another one I need a lot of rewriting on, but did those, and then did some older jokes that I, was like looking at my notes. I'm like, "Oh yeah, I forgot how that joke went, but I'm going to tell
Yeah.
it." And it went over fine. So it was just interesting when the headliner doesn't show up, and you haven't done comedy in 6 months. And they're like, "Hey, we need you to do some more time." So I just did like another, I think, 8 to 10 minutes, but still
Yeah.
like stretched the legs a little bit. I was like, "Man, whew."
Well, I was just talking with June Von Colson on my 3 o'clock show, and she said very early in her comedy experience, she was featuring for a headliner that got into a car accident and he couldn't show up. And she ended up having to do the whole show.
Yeah,
It did not. And that's the thing about comedy, dude. When you're doing shows, you have to be ready for the inevitable stuff. I mean, because
oh yeah,
anything can happen and you could end up in that position,
yeah. I was just trying to like, I was trying my best to stall during sets. So I was I was taking a lot of sips of water. Just so anyway, guys, the next thing is next joke. Just trying to stall my best that I could to stretch out the time, but it was fine.
Okay. Well, hey, Gigi, thanks for watching all the way from the Philippines.
Wow.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm sure, let's see, it's probably, I don't know if it's extremely late or
Probably.
extremely early, but
Yeah.
thanks, Gigi, for watching. Yeah, I got it, but Brandon, I think that, the nerves, for me, I've written and written and written, and I've just gone over my jokes so many times. By the time I get up there, no matter how nervous I may be, boom,
Yeah.
it just comes out,
Yeah.
and it's,
Once that adrenaline starts kicking in, you're like, okay, I
you
got
know
this.
what? It actually, the butterflies actually drive you through your set. Like you said, your first set was probably better than the second
Oh
because,
yeah.
the second one you kind of like calmed down and you were just
Yeah.
kind of like,
Yeah. The hard part
I'm
is
okay,
over.
I'm fine now. But when you're like jacked, you perform better, it seems. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. It was weird. I was talking to Brian April. I think you know who Brian is. I think you've had him
Yeah.
on before.
Yeah.
Because he filmed his dry bar special the weekend before I filmed mine.
Oh,
And
wow.
he was
Okay.
telling me his was kind of different. I think his second set, I could be wrong, but I think he said his second set was better than his first set because he had those nerves were gone the second set
Yeah.
around. And I think it was a better audience the second set for him also.
Oh, the,
So
the second set was
his
better for
second
him.
set was better because I
Okay.
think he was more relaxed.
Yeah.
Because once you get the nerves out of your system, you're like, oh, I'm fine now. This set doesn't matter. They already have my taping from the first set. Where I think for
Yeah.
him, and I could very well be wrong, but I think for him, he said he had a better second set than he did the first set.
Yeah. And well,
Which I can see
I think
that.
it's just different. Every comic is different, as far as your peak performance, as it were. So, and I just think that, like you said, it was so long. It'd been 6 months for you, and you were so nervous. By the time you got out there,
For
it's
this
kind of
one,
like
yeah,
riding a bicycle. It just all came back to you,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
I'm sorry, I was talking about the dry bar set from January. Uh,
Okay.
for my first set was my better set. For Brian April, his second set was better
Okay.
for dry bar. I didn't realize you were talking about this past couple weeks ago. But
Well, I was kind of like combining
okay.
just the idea of,
Oh yeah.
okay, how am I going to adapt to this? And I just thought that, I do believe comedy's like riding a bike. After you've
Mhm.
done it for so many years, it's just it's like pretty much going to come back to you. I'm a little concerned because I haven't done a stand-up set in front of a live audience since March.
Yeah, oh,
I've been
yeah.
doing stuff on Zoom,
Hmm.
and that's okay. But as well as I do, it's not the same thing. So
Yeah, I haven't even been really.
I'm just kind of waiting when I get back. Probably going to be a little awkward, but it's just like riding a bike. I would imagine at the end of the day, it will all come back to you.
Yeah, it's weird.
Well,
Like
look, Brandon,
people,
we
a lot of
pretty
people
much
say
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. A lot of people have been, during this COVID, people are like, a lot of comics, oh, I've been writing a ton. I've been writing a ton during this COVID. I'm like, I haven't hardly written anything
Yeah.
during COVID. It's weird because, like, for me, I am more observational humor. So
Yeah.
during COVID, I wasn't observing hardly anything. Like, I was just watching news, like watching COVID updates. I was furloughed. I
Yeah.
was furloughed from my day job for about 6 weeks, but luckily I've been back.
Yeah.
And I work in an off, like in my home. I work from home, so I sit in front of a desk all day. So I haven't really experienced a whole lot of life. I haven't listened to the radio. Like, sometimes, like, jingles or commercials on the radio will trigger a joke, something in my head where I haven't experienced that. So
Yeah.
it's been a weird time for me. More power to those people who can just sit down and write, but I'm not one of those people, unfortunately.
Yeah, everybody's got their own
Yeah.
style, man, and so I that's what I find fascinating about comedy, man. Everybody's got their own style, and it works. And I've seen you before, and you're a good comic. I saw you out in San Diego, and you definitely know what you're doing out there on that stage. Brandon, I want to thank you for being on the show. We have really knocked this hour out. But before we go, man, can you tell the fans how they can follow you on social media or contact you for booking?
Yeah, social media, you can find me at B Young Comedy, so the letter B and YOUNG Comedy. So that's on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And then also you can go to my website at brandonyoungcomedy.com, brandonyoungcomedy.com. You can reach out to me on there for booking. I would love to travel even during this time. So if your state allows for indoor or outdoor comedy of any sort, feel free to hit me up. I've got reasonable rates, and I will bring as much funny as I possibly can.
Ladies and gentlemen, hit him up. He's a good comic. I've seen Brandon before. Excellent comedian. Check him out. Book him for your next show. Ladies and gentlemen, on the Maurice Brown Comedy Hour, Brandon Young. Brandon, thanks again for coming, for showing up, man. I appreciate it, man. Great conversation, and hopefully we can hook up again, out there in San Diego when all this stuff is like officially out of here.
Yeah, or I go out to DC also. I need to start traveling a little bit more.
Dude, the comedy in DC is great. It's a different crowd because of the political environment, or I just think the comics in DC. I'm not the comics. The audiences in DC, they make you write good stuff. I mean, you can't. Hey, it's not like you go into. I don't mean to be disrespectful to Philadelphia or Boston or New York or Chicago or Atlanta, but as long as you're ready to go, it's not as hard to appease them. But in DC, you really have to write well. But it's a great comedy environment. I would love for you to come down here, and I can show you some good spots to hit.
Awesome. All right, Maurice, have a good one, sir.
Oh, okay, Brandon, God bless you, man. Thanks again for being on the show. And everybody come back to the Maurice Brown Comedy Hour tomorrow at 12 noon. We've got Jeff Allen on the Maurice Brown Comedy Hour. So we'll see you tomorrow. God bless everybody, and may the peace of Christ be with you, Brandon, and your family. See you guys.
See ya.